Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Now, oh gosh, I actually in preparing went a lot further than I thought. So we need to go back here, forgive me, and find the place. Yes. So at least this is evidence of my preparation. Here we go. This is where we left off. So we remember we're in the midst of talking about sin offerings, and we were talking about the various circumstances that might present themselves, the kinds of different kinds of sins, and they were quite varied, and that would demand or at least allow a person to gain atonement through the sin offering if they were performed unwittingly. And here we go. All right. Vahaya, and it shall be. Ki yesham la'achat me'ela, that if a person should be guilty of one of these sins, v'hitvada, this is the very important part here. Hitvada means to make confession, asher chata aleha, that on which he had sinned. So Maimonides brings this out in his Hilchot Tshuva, that the sacrifice itself would not effect atonement unless confession had been made. And confession is part of the process of tshuva. To be able to expressly state verbally what it was that you did wrong. And when you brought the animal and you put your hands on its horns, you would make confession. So, going on. Vehevi et Ashemo Lashem, he shall bring his guilt offering to the Lord, al chatato, for his sin, asher chata, which he sinned. What kind of animal? Nekeva, a female, min hatzon, from the flock, kispa, a ewe-lamb, or seirat izim, or a female kid, lechatat, as a sin offering. V'chiper alav hakohen, and the priest shall make atonement for him, mechatato, from his sin. Now, here's a question that Harlan asked the other day. Not everybody can afford a lamb or a kid. Ve'im lo tagia yado deisle. Literally it means, and if his hands do not reach enough for a lamb. Vehevi et hashemo, he shall bring the guilt offering asher chata, concerning, in that he sinned, for the sin that he brought. Shtei torim, two pigeons, or shnei vnei ona, or two doves, lashem, to the Lord. Echad lachatat, one pigeon for a sin offering, ve'echad la'olah, and one for an olah offering. Remember, the olah is a offering brought for having not performed a positive commandment. So interesting, right? So that he brings two, and the point is that birds are a lot cheaper than animals, and so the Torah wants to make sure that a person has that opportunity to participate in the atonement rite. Let me find out. Okay, see, I think there is no Rashi on this. No. But here we go. So this is called a korban, an offering, ole v'yoreh, that goes up and comes down, meaning in value as depending on the circumstances of the individual. And as I have mentioned, this is an example of oral Torah, even within the written Torah, because we are talking now about circumstances. His circumstances are such that he cannot afford a lamb or a kid. Okay. Vehivi otam el kohen, he should bring them to the priest. Vehikriv asher lachatat rishona, and he, that is, I believe we're talking about the priest here, that which was designated for a sin offering first, umalak et rosho mimul orpo, and he should nick. The word malika has to do with a special way in which birds are offered. So the priest who was going to perform these had to, I believe it was his middle finger, I
Oh,
had to
really?
grow the nail very tall. He had to allow that nail to grow. And so that when he would kill the bird, he would hold the bird, I think, in one hand, and he would insert the nail right in the neck of the bird, in the vertebrae, the back of the neck of the bird, and kill it immediately like that. That was the way in which it was to be slaughtered. Um, Again, please understand the symbolism involved. Every single act here, every single act is significant. Um, why exactly it was done this way? In other words, was there additional symbolism in doing it this way? I am not aware, and I don't believe I've ever read anything that describes the specific symbolism, but that's more a commentary on the degree of my knowledge and how much I've actually read. But at any rate, I am aware of this. So the point here, though, that Rashi's going to make is that the Torah is very specific as to which offering, which bird has to be brought first, right? VaYikra et asher lechatat rishona. He should offer up the one that was designated as a sin offering first. Chatat kodemet leolah. Because in a case where you have to bring two offerings, you first of all want to cleanse yourself, you want to gain the atonement, and then you can bring the olah, even though the olah is also a kind of atonement sacrifice, but not performing a positive commandment, I would say, is less of a degree of sin than performing or actually violating a negative commandment. So this is, and he's taking his commentary from the tractate Zvachim, page 7. Lema hadavar domer. To what can this be compared? Lepraklit shenichnas leritzot, to an advocate who entered, let's say, the court or the king's presence to gain pardon, right? Ritza, praklit, right? So once the advocate has been pardoned, he's been accepted, nichnas doron acharav. Then the gift comes in afterwards. The point about an olah specifically is that olot were whole offerings. Every bit of the animal was offered up. As I said, in the case of an animal, the skin went to the priest. That was the only part that would go to the priest, as I said, as a payment, right, for bringing the offering. Going on, let's see if I find it. Okay, let's read the whole sentence, right? Umalak et rosho mimul orpo, opposite its orif, its neck. Okay, okay. He'll tell you exactly what this refers to. V'lo yavdil, but he shall not just separate it completely. So here we go, right? So that is this is Rashi explaining what we're talking about here. Okay. Lo yavdil, right? He shall not separate it. Eno molek ela siman echad, meaning, so there were several simanim referring to those parts of the animal which were supposed to be severed, okay, and in order for the animal to die as quickly as possible. With a large animal, with a regular animal, there are two simanim. We may have discussed this. Essentially, what the shochet severs, cuts, slices, say, right, is the esophagus, um, and the trachea. The jugular
This
vein.
one says the esophagus or the trachea, that he
Yes,
slits only one organ.
that's the bird I was describing in the case of an animal, right?
Oh,
So yeah, that's okay.
I thought we
Yeah.
were.
No, no, no. So
Mm.
I want to explain that in the case of a regular animal, in order for an animal to be shechted in a kosher manner, the trachea and the esophagus have to be severed in one slice. Inevitably, the jugular vein is also severed, but that is not part of the mitzvah per se. Regardless, the animal dies instantly. I can tell you that I had an opportunity when I was in Canton to actually witness that and to see the animal's eyes glaze over immediately, just instantly, it lost consciousness. Okay. But in the case of the bird, what we're saying here, what Rashi's explained to us, is that only one of these things, and that's what we meant by the simanim. The simanim are, in this case, the trachea or the esophagus. Okay. Orif, to explaining Orif, who gova harosh, right? It's in other words, it's the part of the head, hamishupa letzad hatzavar, which is inclined, which mishupa means inclining to the side of the neck. Okay, so it's from the back. Mul orif, mul haroe et orif. I believe that's what this is, right? So opposite. So ro'eh, one who sees the neck. I believe that that's what it's meaning here, right? The back. V'hu orech kol achorei hatzavar, and we're talking about the length of the entire tzavar is the neck, right? So here, back of the neck, close by that part of the back of the head. Here we are, which sees the neck. That is the length of the entire back of the neck. So this is the actual translation of what we just read. So when we say it sees it, it means it's the back, right? It's the back of it. So just wanting us, the Torah wanting this to be part of reality, and that, that the instructions are at least moving towards a point where this can actually be practiced. The idea of actually practicing it and not just having it in principle. Okay, right. V'hizah midam. So once this has taken place, v'hizah, he shall sprinkle midam hachatat, from the blood of the chatat, right, the bird that was designated as the chatat, al kir mizbeach, on the wall of the altar, v'hanish arbadam, and that the remaining blood, yimatzeh el yesod hamizbeach, he should squeeze it out to the base of the altar, chatat hu. This is a legitimate sin offering, right? Just pointing out, even though it is not the initially mandated offering, but his circumstances were such that this was a legitimate offering, I believe, is what the language is saying. Okay, let's go back here for the Rashi. Okay. V'hizah midam hatat, he should sprinkle from the blood of the sin offering. Ba'olah lo hit'in ela matzui. That with regarding the olah, that second bird, right? I believe what it's saying here is it doesn't require, it should only require the squeezing, mitzui. Okay. Uvachatat, but with regards to the sin offering, so there's a distinction in how these are performed. Haza'ah umatzoi. It requires both the sprinkling and the squeezing. Ochez ba'oref. So again, he holds on to the oref, that back of the neck. Umatiz hadam, right, and he causes the blood to spurt. Nitaz v'holech lamizbeach. So I think nitaz v'holech lamizbeach. In other words, it continues to I think it has to be right, and it continues onto the altar. Okay, chatat hu. This is a sin offering. Lishma kshera. In other words, when he offers up the chatat, he has to declare that this bird is being offered up as a sin offering. That's the lishma. It has to be done with intention. Shelo lishma, but if he doesn't do it with that expressed intention of this bird being a chatat, serving as a chatat, psula, it is invalid. It's an imbalance. So every element is important. Mead, I know you have the Rashi in front of you. Is there anything that you want to add to what I just said? And Lauren, too, I know you have your book. Is there anything I left out or misrepresented?
No, it's really just line by line
Okay.
translation, and yours
Okay.
is close enough. It's
Okay.
it's not a very edifying section.
Okay, so I want
Yeah.
you to know, though, that the
Yeah.
thing that we need to keep in mind is that, remember, the subtext of the Torah is
Yes.
doing what doesn't come naturally.
Yeah.
You have to keep that in mind. And things that we think may be venial, in other words, and by venial, I understand to mean of no deep significance, okay? Okay, as opposed to mortal, okay? Venial sins versus mortal sins, right? Is that what we might consider venial may not be venial. Just because we, as given our level of intelligence, and understanding thinks something may be really okay, it may not be okay, and it may not be okay in a very serious kind of way. And the fact that this involves things that I agree don't necessarily appeal to our aesthetic sense, although to some extent we have softened up quite a bit, I think, on some levels. Um, I think it's there to underscore the fact that this is important. It's important. And if I may be allowed to editorialize a little bit, uh, or more than I normally do, I would say that the fact that, people grow up without any deep appreciation of a divine creator, etc., leads to behaviors that very often, lead a person into a place where life is not worth living anymore. And things happen that are terribly serious. If you were to turn around and say, yes, but many things have been done in the name of religion that are also awful, I would never argue with you on that. Yes, we're capable of taking any good thing and using it for bad things. But I'd also say that people who commit awful acts in the name of religion it's actually a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. So should lead us towards compassion. And remember, I love Hillel's statement. The basis of it all is what is hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor. So onwards. Enough of my editorializing. Going on. Ve'et hasheni, and the second, in other words, the second pigeon or turtle dove, ya'aseh olah k'mishpat. He should offer it up as an olah, as a whole offering, according to its rules, k'mishpat. V'chiper alav kohen, and the kohen shall make atonement for him mechatato, from the sin asher chata, which he sinned, v'nislach lo, and he will be forgiven. It actually says that, right? So what do we mean according to its laws? Kedat, in other words, just according to the rules, ha'amur ba'olat ha'of, right? Regarding an olah that's a bird. This was mentioned at the beginning of our Parsha. The first offering that is mentioned is an olah. If you look at chapter 1 of the book of Leviticus, and it goes through starting with large animals and then moving on to birds. So there are the rules for the bird olah already given. Shel Nadava. In this case, it was a bird which was offered up as a gift. By Rosh HaParsha, at the beginning of our Parsha, it's mentioned there that if a person wants to bring a bird as a gift, as an offering, as an olah, there are rules there as to how that is done. Well, we haven't finished with this idea. So, ve'im, and if lo tasig yado lishtei torim, suppose he can't even afford two pigeons or lishnei vnei yonah or two turtle doves, what's he going to do then? Still requires atonement, right? Just because you have less means doesn't mean you don't have an obligation to give. And I like to say that, they say if you don't give when you're poor, you won't give when you're rich, because generosity is a spiritual matter. It doesn't depend on so much on whether or not you have or you don't have. Because even if you give a little, very little, but if you're giving, there's a tremendous difference between that and not giving at all, just because your circumstances are not good. So in some ways, poverty, on some ways, is a state of mind also. All right, so can't afford these. But he should still bring an offering, asher chata, the one who sinned, asirit ha'efa solet l'chatat. He should bring 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour as his sin offering. Lo yasim aleh shemen. Normally, a meal offering that is an offering of flour requires oil, but it says he should not put on this meal offering oil. Lo yitin aleha, and he shouldn't place upon it levona, frankincense, ki chatati, because this is a chatat. It's a sin offering, and Rashi will discuss that a little bit more. So the point is being able to afford 1/10 part of an ephah of flour, of fine flour, is almost nothing, right? It still gives you, but look at this, what the Torah is doing for us here. Okay. Let me see what it is. Okay, so there's no Rashi there. Let's see here. Okay. Ki chatati, because it is an offering. Ve'ein bedin, and it doesn't make sense, he says, sheyeh korbana be'udar. So I'm sure that some of you have heard of the term hidur mitzvah, which means beautifying the mitzvah. So, for example, one example is you're supposed to cover the challah on Friday nights. So what you do is you get a beautifully embroidered Torah cover, sorry, not a challah cover, forgive me, and just to make that little mitzvah a little nicer. One that is done very often is, on Sukkot, we bring the palm branch and the citron, the etrog, and they are etrog boxes that are beautifully made, just to show a delight in being commanded and in having the privilege of practicing divine commandments. But in this case, because it's a sin offering, we don't want to beautify it. It doesn't make sense to beautify it. Going on. Vehevi'ah el hakohen, and he should bring it to the kohen. V'kamatz hakohen mimena malo kumso. So what happens with meal offerings when they were brought this way is that the priest had to take did not offer up the entire meal offering. Not all the flour went up on the altar, but the priest had to take. And what I'll do is I'll stop the share a second and see if I can sufficiently demonstrate what a kometz is. Let me do that. Okay. So basically, it's taking this part here and taking enough flour in that area that is covered by my fingers. That's how much the priest would do to place on the altar. That's all it needed. So I'm going to go back to the share. Okay. Right. So this is what it's referring to here. The amount that fills up that kometz, it askarata. Askarata refers to the memorial part of the offering. Jastrow explains that he doesn't actually translate this word, but he translates the, let's see, I'm looking to see, idkarta, right? That's the Aramaic, right? So it's the part of an offering that went up on the altar is known as its askara. VaYikra hamizbecha, and he should cause it to smoke on the altar, al ishay Hashem, on the other fire offerings of the Lord. Chatat it is also a sin offering. So let's take a look at this. So it's interesting, right? So with the pigeons or the turtledoves, etc., an olah is a complete offering, right? The bird itself, but there were parts of the bird that were not put up on the altar. So, for example, the feathers, I mean, they would be, if you've ever smelled burning feathers, you don't generally want to make a practice of that. Okay, so let's go on. Here, chatat right? It is a legitimate sin offering. Nikmetzet v'nikteret lishma. So the fact that it adds these words, right? Again, it emphasizes that. It's not like we didn't know it was a chatat, right? I mean, we knew before it was a chatat. So what are these words adding? Again, the same kind of principle as we read elsewhere. Nikmetzet v'nikteret lishma. If its kometz is taken and it is caused to smoke, it is burnt for its purpose, for its express purpose, she'era, it is an acceptable offering, shelo lishma psula. If it is not done for its express purpose, it is invalid. And I'm afraid we are out of time, and I'm going to have to make a marking, and with God's help, we will continue this. We'll meet again, hopefully, which would probably be in a year, but at any rate, hopefully we can continue with this. So I'm going to stop the share. And if anybody has anything you'd like to say for the record, happy to listen. Harlan, yes.
Go ahead. I don't have anything to say, but
Okay.
I can't understand the different practices like the purification offering, the Thanksgiving offering. It goes on and on. And sometimes the priests get the food, and sometimes the person doing
Yes.
the offering gets the
Right.
food. I
Right.
can't understand which gets the food and which
Well,
not.
okay. If you're asking me a question of why there are these distinctions made, I
Yes,
can, okay. The reason is that it's not like it just goes on and on. There are certain circumstances, actually, basically four circumstances that require offerings. And they correspond pretty much to forms of prayer that we even have nowadays. Okay. And it all has to do with trying to reconcile the relationship between human beings and the creator of the universe, our place in this universe. When it's a whole offering, sometimes, in a way, the greatest gift you can give is yourself. And it's possible that the Olah is brought up like that, just saying that I want my creator to have every part of this. This is the symbolism, and this is only one interpretation. It's what I'm able to come up with at the moment, right? So that's part of it. There's a Thanksgiving offering, which is also has a sense, um, basically, of celebration in a way. Very often, the Thanksgiving offering was brought for a miracle that you felt, or a situation where you had faced danger and were successful in avoiding the danger. That's more of a celebration. In case of a celebration, you want to share your food with the people you're celebrating and honoring, etc. And so their various parts of the offering would be given to the people who were engaged in it. Okay, some went onto the altar, some went to the priest, some went to the family. Okay, with a sin offering, it depended on the sin offering itself. Okay? Because there were sin offerings where I believe the priest was required to have some of it as well. Okay? So again, in a sin offering, essentially, you're saying, I'm sorry. I regret what I did. And part of that expression of regret is to make confession, to admit it, but also to present an offering by way of trying to go beyond words. Okay, simply saying you're sorry sometimes isn't enough. Sometimes you have to express the sincerity of your apology a little bit more in a more intense kind of way, for want of a better expression. So if you think about these things, they tend to make sense. Okay? That's certainly a legitimate question. And I'm going to bid you farewell. And with God's help, I will see you next time we meet. Take care.